surviving to thriving. And this will be led by Mrs. Desheen Lopez. And we have an informative session for you this morning. But before we go any further, we would first like to start off with the Belizean national anthem.
Let me stand because I feel jittery.
Next up on the agenda is the prayer by Mr. Ian Hodges.
Good morning, everyone. Let's take a moment to give God hallelujah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'll pray you to Allah. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Lord, we thank you for this beautiful day, and we ask your blessing upon this most kind lecture that it reaches all who need to hear it today, especially in the difficult times. All honor and glory are yours.
Thank you for the words of blessing, Mr. Hodges. And following that, we now have a welcome address by Dr. Charlene Saunders.
Please accept my welcome to each of you participating today in our first public lecture for this semester entitled Trauma, Thriving and Surviving by presenter Mrs. Isheen Lopez. We all have come to recognize that trauma affects people in varying ways. For some, the effects are greater than that of others. Here at UWI Campus, we are fortunate to have a refreshingly compassionate, credentialed, and registered clinical psychologist who has agreed to deliver kindness and lecture on a matter that affects all of us. COVID reality has made all of us so vulnerable. Maybe it is a rapid increase in the numbers or the great uncertainties that brought world leader countries to their knees. Whatever it is, it has created chaos, confusion, and uncertainty. Though we have not been able to fully establish the impact of this pandemic, we remain steadfast, sometimes shaken and afraid, but we continue to manage our lives with our homegrown coping strategies. Although on the surface, we appear to be coping more easily over time, this phase still warrants information about coping strategies to completely and adequately understand our experiences. This public lecture presents one such great opportunity. Our resilience to trauma as a people will eventually determine if we are thriving beyond surviving. I thank you for taking this time out of your schedule to join the University of the West Indies Open Campus for this public lecture. I also want to extend sincere gratitude to our presenter, Mrs. Deshane Lopez, for agreeing to facilitate this session. We do look forward to a wonderful session this morning, and we encourage you to interact via the chat and to post your comments and questions. Welcome again, and thank you.
And a very special thank you to Dr. Saunders for that welcome address. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we move forward with the presentation by Mrs. Lopez, I want to give you some words, and I want you to remember these words. And you can say it with me while you're behind your screen. I am enough. I am worthy. I am strong, and I am safe. Mr. Ian Kacha once more will be introducing the presenter.
Good morning again. Please let me introduce my friend, Mrs. Deshane Gutierrez Lopez is a registered clinical psychologist specializing in administering and interpreting psychological and psychoeducational assessments for learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, and other developmental disorders. Mrs. Lopez also specializes in therapy treatment for teenagers and adults experiencing depression, anxiety, and sexual trauma in a comfortable, safe, and non-judgmental environment. Mrs. Lopez completed her bachelor's degree in psychology with sociology from the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus and her master's degree in clinical psychology from the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus. She is certified by the Kennedy Center to administer the screening tool for autism in toddlers and young children. Mrs. Lopez is a member of the British Psychological Society and has received academic success, earning her lifetime membership in the Pai Chai International Honor Society of Psychology. She is also credentialed with the Veteran Examination Services, offering evaluations for veterans. Mrs. Deshane Gutierrez Lopez has over 5 years experience working with children, teenagers, adults, and families. She has experience working with school-age students at the primary level and has worked in community centers. She has experience working in clinics, hospitals, and children's facilities. She's a wife and a mother of a baby boy. I present to you Mrs. Deshane Gutierrez Lopez.
An introduction. Thank you, Dr. Sanders and the university community for inviting me here today. I am honored today to talk about trauma. How do we survive and how do we thrive? So the aim of today, I hope that by the end of my presentation, you guys will be able to define what is trauma. You will understand what happens to the brain and the body after you experience trauma. You will know how childhood trauma affects us in adulthood. And finally, you will know how you can heal from your trauma. So, what is trauma? According to the American Psychological Association, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after that event, you may have shock or denial. So, oftentimes, whenever we think about trauma, we think about an event, a period of time that is fixed. But today, I will be talking to you that trauma does not only include an event, but much more. There is cumulative trauma. Cumulative trauma is trauma that is experienced and repeated over and over for a long extended time. For example, community violence. Our first responders, our nurses, our doctors, our police officers, and our BDF men and women oftentimes experience cumulative trauma within their period of work. Over and over, they have to encounter different type of violence. They are aggressed against. And so overall, within their 20 years or 25 years of work experience, they have accumulation of trauma as they goes by. Complex trauma is exposure to multiple traumatic events from early childhood. So imagine being 4 or 5 years old and you had your first traumatic experience. And over time, that increased with different things, whether it's another event or it could be the family dynamics, the community that you're raised in. Then there's also generational trauma, something that we don't often talk about, but it's very important. Generational trauma is our collective and cumulative trauma as a society, as a family. We pass it down from generation to generation. And oftentimes it's unconscious. It's the things that is said and not said. It's passed on, it's implied, and we grow up believing that this is the way that we deal with it. Oftentimes, as family members, how a family responds to trauma is influenced, and that's how the next generation adopts. And so sometimes even dealing with trauma can be difficult because it seems contrary to what we know within our family. For example, some people coping strategy is to shut down. When there's a concern in the family, maybe they're afraid to have that conversation. And as a result, shutting down seems to be the way that they respond to trauma. The child learns that when you're frustrated, when you're hurt, you don't say anything, you just act as if nothing happened. That is an example of how generational trauma shows up in our everyday life. So, researchers and clinicians often talk about trauma as the big T trauma and small t trauma. Big T traumas are like the social events that I talked about, the events that I talk about. It's socially validated. We understand these are discrete events. This is what we talk about when we hear the word trauma. We talk about rape, car accidents, physical abuse, natural disasters, home invasions, kidnapping, and also medical trauma. Small t's are things that is socially invalid or invalidated at times. We don't say it, but it occurs and it affects us, right? It's subtle and it's continuous over time. Small t trauma oftentimes affects us even more than big T traumas because they start to get ingrained in how we see ourselves, the world, and others around us. Some examples are an emotionally absent parent, shame for not getting a particular grade, not being seen or heard at home, at work, at school, being told directly or indirectly that you can't express certain emotions. If you recall, we have a famous saying whenever you hit a child or you scold a child and they cry, what do we say? Shut up, don't cry, hold it in. So what that child interprets is, I can't share what I'm feeling. I can't share my pain. I can't share my hurt. The thing is, regardless if it's a big trauma or a small trauma, our body feels it. And I often like to tell my clients that Our body tells us when something is not right. Our body, our skin is our biggest sensory organ. It receives everything. So trauma is stored in our body. The core of traumatic experience is that it is disempowering and it disconnects us from others. We feel a sense of powerlessness. We feel that we're not safe and we feel as if we're not worthy. So, what happens when we experience trauma? Our brain is organized to help us survive. We have the front part of our brain, the frontal lobe, that deals with decision making, organizing, remembering stuff, have that visual memory, remembering the information that we learn on a regular day basis. But even when we're in utero, if you notice, when the brain is formed in the mother's womb, it starts from the bottom up. It starts from the brain stem and then gradually to the limbic system. The front part of our brain is the longest part of the brain that takes to fully develop. In fact, researchers have said that our brain does not fully develop until the age of about approximately 25 years old. So imagine experiencing trauma at an early age. The front part of your brain has not developed. So what you do when you're born is crying. You know, we have the baby movements. And so we will respond from that primitive early childhood, primitive stage of life, how we respond to the world, right? And so our limbic system asks us, am I loved? Our brainstem asks the question, am I safe? And so it's these two components when we experience trauma that drives us. And because the front part of our brain hasn't been developed yet, our body start to make connections with the brain and they start to form protection in terms of how can I protect myself. The brain ultimate goal is to help us survive. And so oftentimes I like to tell people when you are doing whatever it is that you are doing what it takes to survive. The challenge is that even though we are now in a safer environment, our body hasn't really fully registered that. There's a disconnection with what we're experiencing in our body and the front part of our brain. And so we continue to live in survival mode. So we might always say, well, why can't we think? Or why did I do that? That is a famous question that we like to ask. I wasn't thinking, I didn't know what happened. I didn't know what I was doing. It just occurred. One of the reasons why is how the brain and the body connect. 80% of our nerve fibers send information from the body to the brain. And 20% of that nerve fibers are sent down to the body. So trauma is a felt experience. It's not really the event, but what you feel when you went through that experience. How your body stores that, that is really what is happening. And so when we experience trauma, our body and our brain no longer works in sync together to make connections, but rather it goes into how can I protect myself. So oftentimes people like to talk about mental health is just as important as physical health. And I like to change that. Mental health is physical health. Why? Whenever we experience any traumatic experience, we also have a physiological experience as well. We experience muscle tension, hyperventilation, increased heart rate, stress hormones increase, we feel nauseous, we may have loose bowel movements. For males, they may experience a reduction in their sperm count. They may become incompetent sexually. And for the females, a continuous, they may also experience irregular menstrual cycle. So if you notice, whenever we experience trauma, it's not just in the head. We're experiencing it completely. Our entire body is a part of this process. Physically, we're experiencing it a lot, right? Physiologically, we're also experiencing it. If you drop your muscles right now, you'll feel tension in your body, right? And one of the reasons we feel tension in our body is because whenever we're stressed, our muscles constrict. And so our muscles become tight. And so, as you can see, our body feels just as much as we're experiencing psychologically. But sometimes we don't always attribute what we are feeling physically as part of what we've experienced for trauma. So, our brain goes about its day doing the everyday operations, and our body is the one that holds the trauma memory. So, what does surviving look like? Surviving could look like the overachiever who is super ambitious and accomplished, but they never acknowledge their success. Sounds familiar? Or it's the people pleaser that says yes to everything in fear of being rejected. Or it's that strong person that doesn't cry or show emotions. And remember, I talk about generational trauma. We like to emphasize people who are strong, who doesn't cry, who doesn't show any sense of emotion. But one of the reasons they're strong and don't depend on anyone and don't want anyone to assist is because they don't trust others. Remember when I said that when we experience trauma, at the core of it, we become disconnected from others. And as a result, we don't trust. Trust is at the core of human nature. When trust is broken, we feel isolated. No matter how many people we are surrounded, we feel isolated. We feel not loved, not worthy, and there's a disconnect in terms of how we interact. On a given day, sometimes it may be hard to understand, identify a person who have experienced trauma because they may get along well. They may be your sister, your brother, your cousin, your aunt, or your uncle. And it's these little subtle things that shows and enhance what really trauma is, the small T's that I talked about, right? The caretaker who has to take care of everyone, but they oftentimes forget themselves because it's not about me, it's about them. These are some of the things that are passed down from generation. Feeling of I am not worthy. I'm not good enough. You deserve all the love. You deserve all the praise. Everything that you do is excellent, but everything that I do is poor. So I want to spend a little bit time to talk about this brain again, because this is very crucial, right? To understand trauma, to understand why we do certain things is to understand how the brain functions. When we experience trauma, we internalize it. Our body feels it. The front part of our brain, depending on what age we experience that event, or if it's continuous, if it's complex trauma and it happens over and over, what tends to happen is the front part of the brain is either offline or it's reduced in functioning. Why? Because as the body experiences the event, the experiences, it goes into survival mode. And when the body goes into survival mode and the brain goes into survival mode, it starts to reduce the function that it does not necessarily need at this point. It only focuses on how can I survive, how can I be safe, and do I feel love while I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. And so there's always that disconnect. So I always like to show the front part of your brain is offline. And oftentimes, by just being aware of what happens to your brain, that starts to help your healing process. Why? Because we always question, why do I do this? If we're excelling in every other areas, we may be excelling professionally, but in our relationships, that may be an issue, and we don't understand why. It's the unsaid things, it's the subtle things. And that's why I oftentimes tell people that it's not always the big T's that affect us. It's the small little T's that we don't often talk about. It's the subtle things that is implied and we have inherited from generations before. The absent parent, a parent who have never experienced affection, touch, have difficulty passing it on to their child. And we may say, I love her. She have to know I love her. I provide house, I provide the food, I make sure you go to school, get the best education. So she know or he know that I love her. But the affection isn't shown, isn't felt. And remember, I said trauma is a felt experience. And so the limbic system, this part of the brain, the lower part of the brain, is asking, am I loved? And when that affection isn't there, you grow up believing, I am not worthy. I am not lovable. I am not deserving of this. Because sometimes it's not the things, the presence and the housing and the school that is as important, but it's that connection. Our brain is a social organ. It develops when we interact with each other. When we have a young one, the skill set that that baby learns is because of the interaction that he or she has with its parents and caregivers. The more exposure that child have, that more engagement and interaction that child has, the more the neurons in the brain connects and works with each other. That child is more willing to explore and understand his or her environment as opposed to a child who is always threatened to be beaten, told that they are not worthy. That child grew up feeling fear, and that sense of security is not there. And so we oftentimes wonder, am I safe? Am I loved? Do I have any power? These things oftentimes start from early childhood. And it's also the same for those persons who have experienced the big T's. So, what I'm trying to do today is highlight that while the big T's are important, we cannot minimize or we can no longer not talk about the subtle things that is affecting us. When this pandemic hit, it wasn't the fear of getting the virus that was that was making people coming to counseling. It wasn't the illness of a family member. What was happening is that people were now spending time with themselves, with their family. And as a result, past trauma or current traumas were being triggered on a continuous basis. And as a result, things that they no longer were consciously thinking about were starting to resurface because now the body is signaling, I am in distress. I am in survival mode even more. And because this is a pandemic and there wasn't any direct instructions of how to cope and all these things, when our body became in survival mode, it triggered the memories in our body. Now, the memories are stored and scattered throughout our body. And when the shutdown occurred, signals started to spark. Dreams started to become more vivid. We started to experience things or start to question, is this reality or is this a dream? Because now our body is surfacing up with all these things and we're trying to make connections of what is real and what is not real. That is our body and our brain now trying to make sense of what is happening. And so what this pandemic did was open up a wide plethora of information now in terms of what's happening. Am I safe? Am I powerless in this? Am I even worthy of living? Now, what the pandemic also did was a lot of the things initially was talking about social distancing in the beginning, and that threw people off the curve. Why? Because remember I said we're social beings, but also we felt disconnected even more. And when we have that disconnection, our normal coping strategies were no longer present. And as a result, the distress that we were experiencing accumulated even more because the requirements that to keep us safe also brought us to surface the things that we had buried or was unconsciously stored within our bodies that we never had a recollection for. And so you can see then the brain is always trying to survive, right? To making us survive. Now, for persons who are over the age of 25, for example, your front part of your brain is fully developed. So there'll be certain times where it's going off online and trying to make sense of what is happening with the body. And that disconnect causes this more distress within the body. Right? So oftentimes when a person is experiencing trauma, sometimes they are not even aware of it. Oh, this is normal. We talk about experiences as it's just a part of our everyday life. But what we interpret from those experiences makes us question our worth, our safety on a continuous basis. And how does that look like in our relationships? We have difficulty trusting people. So one of the things that I hear often from the teens that I work with is I have a lot of close friends, but I really trust. They highlight that trust aspect, right? When we have intimate relationships, do we have difficulty trusting? Or as accomplished as we are, we question, I can do much better in this. We become our worst critic. And so that becomes how we start to see ourselves and the world around us. There's this continuous cycle of I am not worthy, I am powerless, and I am not safe. So that is the core of what trauma really does to us. And so our survival techniques are oftentimes passed down from generation to generation. What is deemed accepted and what is deemed not accepted. Now, oftentimes people will talk about things that they would do that are maladaptive, that are not helping them. And I often like to tell them when you first started it, it was necessary for you. You are doing it because you needed to survive. What has happened is that now that you're not in that environment or in that situation anymore, your brain hasn't registered that difference. There's still a disconnect with the brain and the body. And so some of the same coping strategies that you were doing, you still use that. That still become your first response of how you deal with distress, how you deal with past memories, whether you smell something or someone's act a certain way that triggers us. It brings us back to that space. And so when we go back into that space, then we go back into our original coping mechanism. So it may look somewhat different, but the underlying reason you're doing it is pretty much the same. I feel unsafe. So when I feel unsafe, I could become aggressive or I shut down. And we have different ways of how we respond when we experience trauma. We go into the fight, flight, or fawn response. The fight and flight is where when you're in that fight response, you're defensive, you're ready to attack, you want to change, you want to move. The flight response, you want to get away from the situation as quickly as possible. So these are the persons, for example, that whenever an argument is coming up, they don't want to have a conversation, that drop right away. Let's not deal with that. Let's push it on the rug. Let's act as if everything is okay. Why? That it become their coping mechanism that they needed that initially to survive whatever they went through or are going through. And so that becomes their first response. Fan is another response that when we become affectionate and we love the person who has inflicted harm on us, we put them on a pedestal and we want to do everything right by them, because if we do everything right by them, we don't get hurt. So you see, all of these responses is in an effort to help us survive and to keep some level of safety. Why? Because at the crux of it, we don't feel safe, we don't feel powerful, and we don't feel worthy. So by understanding why we do certain things, understanding what trauma is, it really gives us an opportunity to be graceful with ourselves and each other. Because we are oftentimes our biggest critic. We're not graceful with ourselves because we do things that we're disappointed in. Why did I do that? I shouldn't have been do that. I should have been know better. The reason why you can say you know better is because the front part of your brain is online now. But when you get triggered, this part of the brain shuts down, and it's the back part of your brain that is taking over and is doing whatever it needs to do to survive. Let me repeat that again. The reason why you don't know why you did something or you can't understand is because the front part of your brain that is responsible for making decisions, that is responsible for going through the pros and cons, understanding the social accepted behavior, and all these things is offline. So you're not making these decisions consciously. You're not making these decisions because you want to. The brain reduces the functioning of the frontal lobe, and it's the brainstem and the limbic system that kicks in. When that kicks in, it's about safety and love. And so you're responding from an emotional and a physiological perspective in an effort to survive. Right? So it's very important that we understand how this brain functions and how does that reflect in our behavior that we do. So we've been all doing our best to survive. And if it's one thing that I want you guys to remember today is that our brain is often our number one in trying to make us survive. We're doing the best that we can to survive. It may not be the healthiest, but in that moment, that is the only decision your brain could think about to respond to the situation that you're in. Isn't that something that we need to be grateful for? Shouldn't we be more appreciative of what we've experienced? When we look at it from that lens, it changes how hard we are on ourselves and our family members that have experienced it, because now we could look at them from a place from understanding. We could look at ourselves and be more gentle with ourselves. Why? We were just trying to survive. But now you don't have to only survive. You don't have to always be in fight mode or flight mode or being in fun mode whereby you're trying to please people so that they don't take away their love, so that they don't take away that sense of safety that you have right now. Now you can thrive. Culturally, we don't always talk about therapy, but I'll come back to that part. So, how do we thrive? Knowledge is power. The fact that you're here today listening, you've already feel a little bit better about your experience that you have because you understand now why you do the things you do. You're trying to survive. Survival of the fittest, right? So the fact that you're here today is saying that your brain, your body was doing the right thing for you in that moment. Now that you're no longer in that situation, how can we jumpstart back our brain, our body to realize that it no longer needs to be in survival mode. So I like to encourage you to date yourself. Spend time with yourself. I always ask the people, have you ever went on a date on yourself with yourself? Have you ever went to a restaurant and just sit down and eat something in your own company? How about saying the words, I am worthy? What does that feel like for you? So say the word, I am worthy. Now reflect on your body. Where do you feel that in your body? I am strong. Where do you feel that in your body? I am safe. Doesn't that feel good? So by spending time with yourself, you get to experience what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Our brain is oftentimes our first signal that something is working good and something is not working good. The music that we listen to, where does that resonate in you? Sometimes we hear a nice music and we're like, man, I feel it in my soul. This music that talk to me. All right. So spend some time with yourself. Listen to your body. Listen to your body and see if you feel safe, if you feel love, if you feel worthy, if you feel like you have power that you can make decisions for yourself. Engage in activities that encompasses every aspect of your life. Our mental well-being is not just what's in our head. It's our social functioning, our physical, our emotional, our physiological, our finances, our education. It's well-rounded. For us to be well-rounded, having good mental health, we have to touch all of those different aspects. What are you doing in each of those areas for yourself, for your loved ones? You know, sometimes when we start to do these things, we get pushed back. Your family might tell us, oh, you did change. Why? Remember, I talk about transgenerational trauma. Societally, that's not a norm. From a society, from a family perspective, that's not how we do things at our household. And so when we start to do these things, when we start to date ourselves, when we start to learn about how trauma affects us, when we start to engage in activities that is starting to make us feel safe and loved, we may get pushed back. And one of the reasons is you're no longer working in sync with the family because you're no longer working from that trauma response. And they probably are working from that trauma response. It's not you being selfish. It's you loving yourself so that you could feel and receive love without questioning, is this real? And you can give love and that person will know that that is genuine love. So who is your tribe? Who is the person that you go to? And a lot of times we have family members, we have friends, we have colleagues, and we say, I have my tribe. But when you're feeling distressed, when you're in a predicament, who do you call? Crickets. Some people have a hard time calling on anyone because they will say, I don't want to be a burden. They have their own things that they deal with. You know what? I can't trust nobody with this because they will let me down. And if they let me down, I can't deal with it. These are trauma responses. Being completely independent is not healthy. We are social creatures. Now, I'm not telling you that you have to depend on everybody for happiness and joy. What I'm telling you is that in your highest moments and in your lowest moments, you want to be able to share that with someone. You want to be able to feel connected. You want to be able to have support. So, who is your tribe? Who is your person that you can depend on? Do you have anyone? That is important because for you to thrive, trust has to be a part of it. And when a person experiences trauma, trust becomes a hard thing. So working towards creating a tribe, a safety net whereby you genuinely feel safe is important. Now, many of you have been living successful life. Different areas you shine and other areas you struggle with. All right. So what if you can thrive in all those areas? Now, when I say thrive, I don't mean that you won't have any downtime or times when you're frustrated or angry, because those are your body way of telling you that something is not right. But what I mean thrive is you don't second guess every single thing that you do. That you're not happy for the minute when you're with your friends, your loved one, and the minute they leave, you feel that sense of emptiness. When I talk about thrive, is that you feel complete, you feel empowered, you feel loved. That your love does not mean that when you're with me, you love me. And the minute you walk through that door, I'm not sure if you love me. So I want you to thrive. I want you to feel love when that person is outside in another country, down south, up north, wherever that person is, that you feel loved. I want you to feel that you are worthy because there is no prerequisite for you to be worthy. Brothers and sisters, you are worthy. I want you to feel that you're empowered, that you can do the things that you put yourself out to do. If you weren't feeling or questioning your love, your worth, what would you be doing? Spend some time and think about that question. If I wasn't second guessing myself, if I wasn't second guessing my worth, if I wasn't feeling powerless, what will I be doing right now? What will be the task that I will be doing? The other thing that I want you to do is where can you go for help? Now, I had mentioned counseling early on, just briefly, and I want to come back to that because counseling is not something that we often talk about openly. It's often a hush hush thing. It's something that we're hesitant and we don't know what to expect because it hasn't been a part of our norm to talk about the things that hurts us. It hasn't been out about our norm because we were told as children, people only want to know your business. They will listen to you and they will talk about you. I'm not saying that it's not true, but I'm not saying that's not the only truth. All right. So it's who do you find as a listening ear? How can you create a safe environment to process the feelings that you've been experiencing, to connect, to help you connect the brain and the body together so that you could live your best life? So when we talk about counseling, there's always that, should I invest in it? Shouldn't I invest in it? So what it really is counseling? When we talk about counseling, it's a therapeutic relationship. It's different from your friends, your colleagues at work, or any other relationships that you have. And one of the reasons it's different is because one, it comes from a place of understanding. We are not living in it with you. And because we are not living with it with you, we are not a part of your trauma response. And so it's easier for us to one, educate, teach skills, and give you that space to say what you want to say, without worrying about how will she feel about what I said. It's that sense of freedom to say the things that you're too embarrassed to say, is to say out loud, well, I may think this, or this is what I really want, without wondering if, will she hold that against me? Will he hold that against me? So counseling is a safe space for you to process and talk about the things that you're experiencing. It's also not a place that you will come and get advice for. Why do I say that? Oftentimes, we use the television as a means of saying, well, this is my idea of what therapy is. I'm going to lay down in a chair and just talk out my soul out, and then the therapist will come and tell me how to fix my life. Unfortunately, we're humans too. And so we don't have the answers. What we do have is we have studied enough to learn strategies to understand human behavior, that we use that skill set to foster an environment for you to process, for you to learn skills, and for you to decide what is best for you, right? So counseling is something that if after this presentation you realize that, I have some things that I really need to work on, go to counseling if that's what you need at this point. Like I said, if you have your tribe, date yourself, do activities that you engage in, and learn about your own experience in terms of relearning what you have experienced and try to understand it for you, then that's okay. But if after this presentation, you're having emotions coming up, discomfort, thoughts here and there, and you want to have a safe space to try to understand what's happening, I'm recommending that counseling is always a revenue. It's a great investment because for all the things that you're struggling with, what that does is that it helps you to process that you're no longer working in survival mode. You're no longer in that fight, flight, or fawn response, that now you're able to do things that you wanted to do, was afraid to do, and it your increases your ability to see more what is in front of you. It increases your ability to want to strive for more. It improves your communication style. It improves your relationship with your loved one. But more importantly, it improves your relationship with yourself. And that, my friend, is what I'm recommending, that if you guys want to thrive, invest in yourself. We have all experienced trauma in some form of the other. Depending on your social network and your early childhood experiences, you may have more buffers than the next person sitting beside you. And buffers are great if you utilize them, right? So if you have your tribe, if you're always reflecting in terms of trying to understand and process yourself, kudos to you. And if you're struggling with it, hey, it's life, right? Remember I said that our main priority first is always to survive. So now I'm telling you that you don't have to survive. You have the resources within yourself. And if you need professional help, there's always professional help as well. So thank you for listening. If there's any questions.
did mention, you have to realize that in the Caribbean, it's still taboo, like you mentioned, and it's one of those things that is a generational ailment. It's not a one day thing to get rid of, and it's not a one person thing to get most of the time. Or would you say all the time?
So when we work on ourselves, and if everybody work on themselves, then collectively we start to share that. People notice when you start to change, you know. People notice when you're in your healing process. They may not have the word for it. They're like, you're different. And sometimes we interpret it as they're saying it as a negative way, but they see that change. What we're trying to do is to encourage people that let's talk about it more openly, you know. Let's talk about those subtle things that we don't say so that we could have a language for it. Because when we keep it a secret, then we struggle internally.
And that's out of innocent ignorance because they don't know what it is. So the first thing that they conceptualize is a change.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do we have any questions? Oh, there we go. All right. So Leonard Chavarria said, very informative. I must agree. Also, someone else said, amazing presentation. Love the explanation of small trauma, small T trauma. So many times it goes unnoticed and just things that we have to deal with. Definitely insight from a new perspective. Yeah, we have to do that as well. Wonderful, informative presentation. Yeah. Another thank you. Thank you guys for commenting. Does anyone have any questions before we move forward? And then another thing, Mrs. Lopez, I wanted to mention is the community effort when dealing with trauma. So you have a collective of individuals that don't know what they're dealing with and have never been taught about it. What is the first step in ensuring that we break this cyclical, malignant tumor that's known as trauma and simple emotions, depression or anxiety is so frowned upon today. How do we
So this is a start. Having more education and campaigns about expressing it, educating people about it, because oftentimes we have the feeling, I feel this way, and I have the words to describe it, and so we don't acknowledge it, right? So when organizations, when institutions like the University of the West Indies do talks like this, what it does is allowing people to, oh wow, okay, now I have a word to describe what I'm experiencing, right? So as a community, as social agents, is us trying to educate people more in terms of how can we define what we're experiencing? Because what I've realized is whenever I explain to clients what happens when they experience trauma, they look at me like this. Wow.
yeah,
Right?
they're shocking.
Just wow. Because all the while they were thinking something is wrong with me. I am not good. I am defective. And when they understand the science behind it, they get to be a little bit more gentle with themselves. All right. So I'm hoping that this could be an opportunity for everyone to start to educate people about what's really happening. Trauma is more common than we think. Right. And so the more that we can let people know that, okay, we understand, because oftentimes people don't feel like people get me. They don't get me. Right. And so when they feel that way, they step back into the shadows. So now we're creating a platform and we want people to say that I am worthy. I am lovable. I am safe. I am strong. I am enough. Because when we experience trauma, it's at the core of those that makes people have a hard time healing is because they don't feel safe. They don't feel loved. They don't feel worthy. Why I would do this for? It don't make no sense. You know, so it breeds that cycle of continuity. And that's why from generation to generation it continues. It's because we start to create a sense of hopelessness. Right. So as to answer the question again, institutions educating people about what is trauma, creating a terminology for it will help people. They will understand. And then also highlighting where they can access service from, whether it's just for educational materials or actually doing the counseling, doing the work, right? And then for us is to encourage our brothers and sisters to go to counseling, go to therapy. Because sometimes when people say, get a need for that professional, they take it like as an insult. But what they are trying to really say is, you are worthy, you are lovable, and I believe that you deserve to work with a professional because you need more than I could offer you. Imagine if that was the understanding that they interpreted instead, rather than you need a professional. I'm not crazy, you know? So if we start to be gentle with each other in terms of even the messages that we send, we have a better
And
opportunity.
also breaking the misconception. That's the first thing. We have a commercial. Onando St. Bernard said, we are surviving and acknowledging that with clients, powerful to help clients relax a bit. Lore said, I love the emphasis on the small keys. Oftentimes, clients think that their issue is so small compared to others that it is nothing. That sometimes something is wrong with them for feeling affected by these small keys. So people are out there feeling that they have feelings.
Yes. Because whenever we talk about trauma, we think the big traumas, the big events. We don't talk about the small, we don't talk about the subtle things. But the thing about the body is the body doesn't differentiate if it's a big T or a small T. The body feels it all, right? The brain responds in that same way. And so it's also letting people know that it's not just someone who went into a car accident. It's not just person who have experienced rape. It's not just person who have experienced medical trauma, but it's all those small things because we have to validate their experiences. And I think oftentimes, because when I search trauma, it just talk about the big T's initially, right? And so oftentimes that's what people think firsthand. It's just events that occur. So continue to encourage your clients that their experiences is valid. Continue to allow them to validate that for them, the educational component. And like I said, our body takes the brunt of it. And so whenever there is any treatment, any any type of thing that you want to do to help your clients is to work on the body first. So teaching them these coping skills, these breathing exercises, these relaxation techniques before you could do anything with challenging their thoughts, before you could do anything to let them do homework and plan and organize and look at the future. Teach them how to diffuse the stress that they're feeling. Teach them how to relax the body so that when they're in a relaxed mode, they are able then to process. Because when the body is relaxed, the limbic and the brain stem reduces its function. It's no longer in survival mode. And what happened is the frontal lobe, the neural cortex, kicks in, and then you could think and make decisions. So before we could plan and do anything, we need to relax the body.
Thank you so much for that, Mrs. Lopez. And I'm sure the audience really enjoyed that session as well. Thank you once again.
All right. Well, thank you guys for having me.
It was our pleasure. Now, ladies and
Hello, everyone. John Scott, student academic representative for the University of West Indies Open Campus, Belize City. First, I would like to thank all who stayed with us for the entire presentation on whichever platform you viewed us on. Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Ian Kacha, who did the invocation and introduction. Thank you to our head, Dr. Charmaine Sanders, for that wonderful welcome. To our wonderful presenter, Mrs. Deshane Gutierrez Lopez, for such a timely lecture during these COVID times. To our Mistress of Sermon and fellow UWI student, Ms. Ronisha Gentle, for her excellent work. To our technical team who made this all possible, and to all watching, I say thank you. And we hope to see you all another time for more UWI Open Campus Belize lectures. Have a great day.
And thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. I believe there was a bit of audio issues. So for those of you who did not hear it, we were relaxing and we were doing some muscle and breathing exercises to ensure that we are one with ourselves first. So one more time for the road, all right? We're going to drop our shoulders, tilt our heads, and we're going to take some deep breaths in and out. This is the important part where you want to realize what exactly is the issue within yourself. And like I mentioned, targeting that and accepting that will ultimately eradicate the community and societal negatives that we have when it comes to psychology and trauma. One more thing before I go. You remember those phrases that we mentioned at the beginning and in the middle? I want you to say it with me one last time. I am enough. I am worthy. I am strong. And I am safe. This has been the UWI Open Campus Belize lecture number 1 on surviving societal trauma. It was presented by Mrs. Deshane Gutierrez Lopez and hosted by yours truly, Miss Ronisha Gentle. Until next time, stay safe, all of you, and thank you for joining us.